In this episode of our Stories from the Strongrooms series, we explore Hull and the surrounding area through its community culture and history. Looking back over 1500 years, from pre-Norman conquest through to present day, we highlight those influences and cultures which have shaped the area, some of which are still visible and exist to this day. One group of pre-conquest settlers were the Angles and Saxons of northern Europe, who began to settle Britain from the 5th century. Traces of these pre-conquest settlers is still visible today. For example, believed to be an ancient trackway leading from Sutton to Drypool, Sutton Trod is believed to date back to the 11th century and used to access Drypool from the village of Sutton and beyond. Part of the track, also known as Lover's Lane, is still in existence today, running from the village of Sutton to Sutton Road flyover. The track continued through what is today the estate running parallel with Lambeth Road, before cutting across Rockford Green and the former Reckitt Sports Ground on Chamberlain Road, before joining with what is today Woodhall Street. From here, it linked up with Stone Ferry and later Drypool. Villages such as Gansted, Attic and Bishop Burton predate both the Normans and Vikings and trace their origins back to the Angles and the Saxons. From the 9th century, Britain was subjected to Viking raids. Willoughby, Caerkellet and Skidby all derive their names from Danish-speaking Vikings who settled the area from the 9th century. Wyke is Scandinavian for creek, Wyke of course being the forerunner to Hull. It was the Vikings and English that dominated political, cultural and commercial activities across much of Britain for the next 200 years. Change, however, was just beyond the horizon. Defeat at Stamford Bridge in 1066 of the Norwegian king Harold Hardrada by the English king Harold Godwinson largely signalled the end of the Viking raids on England. However, shortly after, Harold himself was killed at Hastings by the invading Duke William of Normandy. From 1066, England, followed later by Scotland, Ireland and parts of Wales, was subject to Norman rule. It was the Norman-French aristocracy that began to spread their influence, with all but a few English nobles being dispossessed of their land and titles. Norman French became the language spoken by much of the ruling class. Those that came across with William were given land once held by the English nobility. In the case of a Flemish associate, Drogo, he became Lord of Holdness. These new settlers brought European influences, styles and cultures. Perhaps the most famous legacy of the Normans was the introduction of castles and the reintroduction of Romanesque architecture. Despite the area not being known for its castles, castles were built at Skipsea, Aldeburgh and Bransholme. Several religious buildings were built, rebuilt or modified in the Romanesque style by the Normans. The Normans predate Hull and therefore Hull has no Norman architecture, but look beyond and several Norman churches can be found. The Church of St Mary's at Beverley, for example, is very much Norman and dates from 1120. Bridlington Priory was founded by the Norman Walter de Gant in 1113. St Andrew's Church at Aldeburgh can trace its origins back to the Normans, while Skipsea's All Saints Church was originally built by the Normans within the first few decades of their arrival. French continued as a spoken language of the ruling class for the next 300 years, while Latin was the official written language of government. Despite this, efforts were made by the Normans and their successors to integrate into English society. Anglo-Norman marriages were common. Monarchs too made attempts to learn English, including William the Conqueror and Edward III. Thousands of French words entered the English language after 1066. For example, sheep, pig and cow are Old English, but today their French counterparts are used referring to their meat, such as mutton, pork and beef. Religion played a significant role in the lives of people. Abbeys such as those at Mews and Burstall were founded by Normans. Situated south of Skefflin, Burstall Abbey was founded in 1115 by the nephew of William the Conqueror. Benedictine monks, originally from northern France, lived, worked and died at Burstall Abbey. Religious communities like that of Burstall and Mews presided over spiritual and economic affairs for almost the next 400 years before their dissolution by Henry VIII in 1537. While remnants can be still seen from Mews Abbey just north of Hull, Burstall has since been lost to the waters of the Humber, sometime from the late 18th century. One family that appears to trace their lineage back pre-Norman conquest was the Sutton family. The earliest recorded name of the Sutton family is that of Seawood. Seawood lived during the time of the Norman conquest in 1066. He, along with a small number of English, appear to have retained their holdings, or perhaps hold some influence despite the Norman conquest. By the 12th century, descendants of Siward were firmly aligning their colours with their new French-speaking overlords, who, at the time, were the Counts of Aumale, French-speaking nobles who held land on both sides of the Channel. For the next 300 years, the descendants of Siward became the Lords of Sutton. Sayer de Sutton is reputed to have built the Motte and Bailey Castle at Bransholme, on the site known today as Castle Hill, from the mid-12th century. Castles introduced by Normans were built for defence, or suppressing and dominating the local population and area. Originally built of wood, these French Motte and Bailey castles became more permanent, traditionally built in stone, but for the castle at Bransholme, more likely built in brick in the 14th century, before its eventual retreat into history. As the town of Hull developed from the late 13th century, we see names that may well trace their origins prior to the Norman conquest. Hull's White Frigate, originally Aldgate, appears to be Scandinavian in origin, gate being Old Norse for road or street, while old means old. At Beverley, Flemingate takes its name from Flemish weavers that settled the town in the 14th and 15th centuries. From its foundation in 1299, Hull would have been home to merchants, mariners and migrants from all over Europe. Some would have simply passed through, others may have settled in and around the area. Sculcoates, just north of the old town, is believed to have taken its name from a Danish settler in the 12th century, Scully. Coates means cottage or farmstead, therefore Scully's cottage later evolved into that of Sculcoates. This settlement grew up close to the River Hull, in and around what is Eyre Street today. A medieval manor house was in the area during the 14th century, possibly on or around the site of Scully's original settlement. The Church of St Mary's was founded a century later after Scully's arrival. As a result, the town and the surrounding area became one of many nationalities and religious creeds, all of whom lived and worked in the town and its immediate area. During the reign of Elizabeth I, the town's first black migrant saved Bartholomew Burnet in 1599, and over the centuries Hull has established a small black community. During the 17th and 18th centuries, Dutch influence was evident in Hull. Trade with Holland played its part, which in turn brought Dutch influence and styles. Daniel Defoe, on his visit to Hull in 1720, noted that Hull's trade with Holland was considerable. The statue of King William III, better known as King Billy, was created by Peter Scheemakers, a Dutch sculptor. Further connection with the Netherlands can be seen in the design of some of Hull's most historic buildings, such as Crowle and Wilberforce House, and the Old Dutch House, once on Dagger Lane. With Hull's expanding connections through its maritime trade, it's not surprising that Defoe used Hull as the port in which Robinson Crusoe set sail from in his novel of the same name. Born in Amsterdam in 1708, Joseph Peace was sent to London by his father to establish a family business. Joseph, however, made his way to Hull, establishing a business on Hull's High Street. His many business activities and interests included whaling, seed crushing, shipping, and the manufacture of paints. His warehouses are still visible on High Street, which are now converted into apartments. He established the first bank in Yorkshire in 1754 from his home, number 18 High Street, which eventually became part of Barclays Bank. Although Irish labourers were employed in the construction of Hull's first dock, the New Dock, later Queen's Dock and of now called Queen's Gardens, it was from the mid-19th century that Hull became home to a large Irish population, with many living in and around the Groves area on the east bank of the River Hull. In 1851, Hull had over 3,000 people in a population of nearly 100,000 who were born in Ireland. A particularly large number of Irish from Sligo made their home in Hull, Sligo being the port in which many thousands of Irish left during the famine of 1847-1851. The area of Jennings Street and Jarvis Street housed a particularly large number of persons who were born in Ireland. To accommodate this Irish population, places like St Charles Borromeo were built as places of worship for Hull's Catholic community. Today, it is likely that descendants from those who crossed the Irish Sea during the 19th century are now firmly Hullensians. With its links to Eastern Europe, the largest and most influential migrant group in Hull were the Jewish. From the second half of the 19th century through to the outbreak of the First World War, Hull's Jewish community helped change the town's religious and economic landscape. Osborne Street, often associated as Hull's Jewish quarter, and while true, Osborne Street was very much a cosmopolitan area with many different cultural, ethnic and nationality backgrounds. The community was supported by kosher bakeries, butchers, delicatessens, fish shops, 6 synagogues and numerous Jewish charities. Of those born into Hull Jewish families, a number entered the legal profession. Some names are woven into Hull's legal fabric such as Goschalks, while the Jewish burial grounds of Hesel Road, Ella Street and Delhi Street are a reminder of Hull's Jewish links, with the Ella Street burial ground still in use today. The end of the Napoleonic Wars, together with advances in shipping technologies, made North Sea routes safer and more reliable, and with it Hull became an attractive proposition with a movement of people and goods. Craftsmen, traders and migrants from far and wide, including Scandinavia, Russia, Northern Europe and Italy, made Hull their home. The area around North Street was home to a small Italian population. Some of the Italian community were involved in the production of ice cream. Perhaps the most well-known and still within living memory is Paget's, but also the Petoni family of North Street were involved in making ice cream during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. As the shortest route across the country, Hull played a significant role in the transmigration of Eastern Europeans. Between 1851 and 1914, over 2.2 million European migrants passed through Hull on the route to a new life in North America and beyond. Although for many, their stay was short, a mixture of languages, culture and religion would have all rubbed shoulders. By the mid-19th century, Germans became the largest foreign-born population in Hull. The German Lutheran Church was established in Niles Street to support the community. Hull retained a large German population, only behind a handful of other towns, including London and Manchester. Hull's most well-known German family were the Hohenreins. Settling in Hull in 1848, George Frederick Hohenrein opened a butcher's shop. Despite George becoming a naturalised British citizen and successful business owner, the outbreak of the First World War led to much anti-German sentiment. Sadly for the Hohenreins, some in Hull took exception to the family, who had now been settled in the town for over half a century. The family was subjected to attacks. This resulted in the Hohenreins changing their name to the more British-sounding Ross. After the war, the Hohenreins, now the Ross family, once again prospered as butchers, with Charles Ross becoming an important businessman in the town. Hull is among a number of UK towns and cities home to people from across the globe. Today, its largest ethnic population is Polish, with a number from the community opening their own shops and businesses. Hull has a small Chinese community with a number establishing restaurants and takeaways, which are popular throughout the city. Hull has its own permanent Muslim community. Hull's first mosque opened just after the Second World War to cater for seafarers visiting the port. Today, this diverse community is visible across the city, including Springbank, Princess Avenue and Beverley Road. Despite negativity, perhaps related to the EU referendum, many European and non-Europeans have occupied parts of Hull over the centuries. In 2011, Hull's population made up around 5% of those born outside the UK. Hull and the area wouldn't be the same today without those from beyond its shores that have helped expand its commercial and cultural horizons. Since its foundation by Edward I in 1299, and even prior to this, Hull and the surrounding area has been home to tens of thousands from across Europe and indeed the world. These people have shaped the city, its surrounding area, and will continue to do so for years to come. We hope you enjoyed this episode and our Stories from the Strongrooms series. If you'd like to discover more about anything covered in this episode, why not visit the History Centre or start your journey of discovery by visiting the Hull History Centre website, www.hullhistorycentre.org.uk.